Hello, thanks for joining us again today. Well, today is Tuesday, May the 12th, and I hope you're still healthy and being blessed, and that's a wonderful thing. Here it is, we're going to be in the middle of May by the end of the week, and so time certainly is rolling on. As they say, time stands still for no one, but obviously there's changes that are being made, and I think for the positive, and certainly we're glad that if people are not getting the virus and it's not being spread, then obviously that's what we want. Yesterday we started a series, so I'm going to try to get this kind of quickly. Yesterday I went much longer than I really wanted to, but it was kind of our groundwork, and I'm going to try to keep it under 10 minutes today. Yesterday we kind of started a series about government, and especially in light of our reaction. Especially when you have people who say, "Well, we've not done the right thing, or we've been cowardly, or we kind of didn't show our faith, so to speak, when we decided not to assemble at church when the government said to not do that." Okay. The other side of it is, and most people follow this path, of course, is the fact where we said, "Well, here's what's been said. We understand why it's been said, and here's what we're doing as far as following those mandates." So, what does the Bible say? Well, this won't be exhaustive. I'm not sure if it'll answer your question. It may cause me to have some derision my way, but I certainly do want to look at what the Bible says to be able to say to somebody, "Well, here's why we did what we did, and we did it because here's what God said about it." So yesterday we talked about, of course, as we opened up, about the word govern, which is the root word of government. And yesterday we looked at the only time that the word government is used in the New Testament. That was in the passage in 2 Peter chapter 2. Today we're going to look at the only time that the word governments in the plural sense is used, and that's going to be in 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse number 28. So if you do like to follow along, we'll let you find that. 1 Corinthians 12:28. We're trying to say, look, we understand frustration. We understand when the normal becomes abnormal, and our schedules are suddenly changed. But we've got to do the right thing, and that's certainly what we want to do here. So we're going to look at the word governments and how it's used. Interesting here. Kind of will help us understand, I think, and kind of tie it in a little bit to yesterday. And in general, what is God saying about our role as a church, our role as a Christian in terms of government in general, whether it's these mandates or just our general attitude and philosophy towards them. All right, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 28 says this. It says, "And God hath set some in the church, first apostles, secondarily prophets, thirdly teachers, after that miracles, then gifts of healings, helps," now here's our word, governments, diversities of tongues. All right. Now I understand the concept here is being, or the concept really is about the church. And it's very evident that when it says here, "And God hath put in the church," and it mentions the positions, and it mentions governments. All right, so let's look at that a minute here. All right, we often don't use the word governments in our church, but we do use the word how a church should be ruled, and we understand there's guidelines here. But the word governments here is used, and when you look at the word, how it would be defined as far as a word, and trying to use the Greek language of its day, it means to steer, pilotage, as in a pilot, and then figuratively it means directorship, and that would be in the church. So it's real easy to understand here that God has structure within the church, and we're not going to go through all the details of that, don't need to, but the idea that there is structure, and the idea that it uses the word governments there, meaning that there is something or someone to answer to. There's a structure that gives us a sense of knowing that when the governments, we'll just say within the church, has something to say, then there's something that the followers should listen to and adhere to. Now, again, when you look at this, all right, what does that have to do then with civil government? And without getting into things that we're going to get into in the remaining 3 days, the idea here is about structure. Now, remember we talked about yesterday the unsaved world, especially the world that goes to the extreme in following the flesh, which means they don't have the Spirit. The Bible says they despise government. Something that we didn't really get into yesterday, and I want to kind of tie this into this to help us understand an attitude that if we have the right attitude within the church and its structure, then having the right attitude toward civil government kind of goes hand in hand. Now, yesterday we talked about, and I didn't turn to these verses, but it talks about speaking evil of dignities. All right. Or let me give you the other reference where the word dignity was used over in the book of Jude. Let me turn to it here. In the book of Jude, it uses the same word, dignities. All right. I believe that word's only used twice in the New Testament here. So notice what it says here in Jude. There's only really one chapter, just the book, but verse 8. It says, likewise also these filthy dreamers defiled the flesh, despise dominion. All right. Despise dominion, then that is a word that is similar to or is a synonym of the same word government. All right. Remember over in 2 Peter, it says they despise government. Who are these people who despise government? People that's going to be judged in the day. People that obviously have no authority, and that authority, of course, being God. But it says they despise dominion and speak evil of dignities. Exactly the same phrase that was used there in 2 Peter chapter 2. So speaking evil of dignities, all right. Says in verse 9, yet Michael the archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moses, durst not bring against him a railing accusation, all right, but said, the Lord rebuke thee. Now, that word railing there, all right, if there's a word that I could say that you see on the social media platforms, is people who rail. They're going off all the time. It seems to be more their nature than not. It seems to be if there's something they can find that they can contend about, then they're going to do that. Now, I know people that they don't profess any Christianity. In fact, I know people, and I know these people. I would never say the word and not even want to get close to describing them when you say, well, I know you're talking about. Most of you wouldn't. I don't think any of you would by me saying this. Sometimes I use bad language. And sometimes, boy, when it looks and some authority has said anything, then they rail, all right? The Bible says there's a kind of people who are railers. Now, when it comes to the people of God, all right, let's bring this to what has been said here in Corinthians, where it talks about that God has given positions and it talks about governments. There are people who resist authority in general, and there are Christians that have an attitude, all right, that they seemingly resist. If something's said, then it's almost like they're the first one to say something about how they're not sure they agree with it or they don't agree with it. God says our attitude should be one when it comes to authority, godly authority, and when it comes to the authority of God, that we're to be submissive. We should be orderly. You know, the church of God should be decently in order, the Bible says. So how does this relate then to what's going on now? Well, the attitude is not to be a railer, number one. When you get on these social media platforms and you just go off and you say the things you say, it doesn't look good for Christianity when your demeanor is a railer, okay? A railer is a characteristic of people who don't know God. It says here in that example where Michael the archangel contending about him and Satan contending about the body of Moses. I don't understand why that was done, but the idea was even Michael the archangel, who seems to be the archangel of God's power. It's almost like the extension of God's judgment, almost in a sense, the power of God, whereas Gabriel seems to be kind of like an angel that brings great messages. But even Michael the archangel says, look, the Lord rebuke thee. So we got to be careful when we seem to be the avenue of all rebuke. We seem to be, we're always going off. So bringing this into terms of this idea how there's railing against the government. Look, I understand, and I believe God will give the wisdom and does give the wisdom to understand the difference between our position and how we should stand with government that God has given, and the idea of realizing there's a time when that we have to take our stand like the apostles did and all of that. So the idea then, of course, what's our attitude? If our general attitude is we see something and we make a comment about something and then we go off, and all of us have seen the examples where some, I think, well-meaning person will say, well, I want to ask a question and I don't want it to turn into an argument, and then all of a sudden 100 replies later, you've got people that are just, and to be quite honest, very unkind and very unchristian. Well, the first thing to understand how we should respond is, what is our attitude to authority in general? I said this yesterday, I'm going to say it because as a pastor, when I start saying that I rule the church and it's got to be done my way, and that attitude comes across, and then we start railing against other brethren and other churches who do things somewhat even slightly different, it becomes almost like it's our way, and instead of it being an attitude of this is God's church, it's God's way. God has systems set up. God has a structure. So God has a structure in the church. And sometimes, seemingly, the ones who either don't like structure in general or the structure in the church is the same ones who can be railers against our government when things are done. So we're going to kind of move along with this. You may say, man, you should have said more. I'm on purpose kind of guiding this a little bit. Let's think about our attitude today. Let's think about our spirit. Let's think about that. We know God. We understand how God is angry with the wicked every day. We understand that. We got to be careful, but God's not an angry God. Okay, He can get angry, but God's not an angry God. Be careful and look at the difference between being an angry person and being able to show some righteous indignation when it's necessary. So I hope this helps you today. Hope you have a wonderful day, and until tomorrow, as we kind of continue along this path, God bless you.